Hey there, everybody. This is Jay Frost, welcoming you back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And it's a pleasure to have you. And if you've been here before, welcome back. If this is new, welcome to this little party. We do this at least once or twice a week. We've been doing that since 2016. And of course, this is all sponsored by our friends at DonorSearch. So if you'd like to learn more about them, we probably won't be talking about them today. But of course, if you'd like to learn more, and I hope you will, you can do that at DonorSearch.net. Again, that's DonorSearch.net, the place where they have information on all the people who care about your cause. So do take a look at that, if you will. And while you're there, you can learn all about the Mastermind series. That's under the resources tab, where there are recordings from our podcast, recordings from these sessions, etc., all there and available to you, as well as on their YouTube channel. But don't go away today, because as we can see already in the chat, thank you, Linda, thank you, Mary. The conversation really is right here when it's live. So we're really glad you could be with us for this conversation with Shaista Keating, and really happy that you can be a part of it too. So we'll be watching the chat and watching the Q&A throughout in order to make sure that if you have anything to say or any questions to ask, that we put those right into this web of the conversation about a very very not complicated, but very heady subject. One that, however, has big, deep, and meaningful implications for all of us in the nonprofit sector. And so with that, I want to welcome, of course, my friend to the stage. If she'd turn her camera and her mic on, and then there you are.
Hi, Jay. Wonderful
Hi.
to see you.
It's great to see you. And I don't know if everybody knows your background. I know you'll talk a bit about it, but just to make sure that there's at least a flavor of it. Of course, you are the CEO at Arcasun, and I'm going to encourage people to take a look at that, and also a director at TechSoup. And if people are not familiar with that, that would be frankly surprising, but they may not know all that TechSoup does. So it'll be a chance today to let everybody here talk with us about everything from TechSoup to the subject at hand. And of course, that's this whole concept of digital inclusion, especially in an era of AI and quantum computing. And in order to get into that, I do want to give you a chance to define some of these terms, because they will be well known to some, not to others. But more importantly, I think a lot of us define things differently. So maybe we can go there. So will you start us off maybe by defining digital inclusion?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, the reason this conversation is so important is that we live in a completely digital world, right? Or we think we do, at least the few of us that are a part of this conversation today. And it is transforming all aspects of our lives, yet half of humanity can't connect. So we'll come back to that. But the way that digital inclusion is defined is essentially, the goal is that if we were to be able to be a fully inclusive world, it refers to the activities necessary to ensure that all individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, have access to and use of information and communication technologies. In my mind, simply put, inclusion provides people across the globe to have the opportunity to use technology to live, learn, work, thrive, and even love each other, right? The National Digital Inclusion Alliance takes the definition and really puts a lot of meat around it, in that the access should be affordable to internet service, but also to internet-enabled devices that help to meet users' needs. The Alliance also makes digital literacy a priority in inclusion, and because of course we need those skills if we are to transform lives through technology adoption. And yet one step further, the Alliance talks about applications and online content, because we want this type of content to facilitate self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. So in short, it's really being able to use technology to live our lives.
There's a lot there, but the most simple part that you said up front about half the world not having access, and making sure that we understand that's also true here in the United States. I mean, we're all having this conversation right now, everybody in the room with us virtually. So it feels very natural. To some of us, it feels all too natural because we're online so much of the time. But I just talked with a library today, one that I'm working with, and they talked about how in where they're located in Wisconsin, that a lot of people have very little access. Either it's because the population doesn't have the resources necessarily to be using a smartphone, but even those with resources might be living in an area where they don't have a good connection. So their library every night is full of cars glowing as people are accessing the internet. That is the only way that they can do it, rich or poor in that particular area. And that's true around the country. So there are so many examples of this, and certainly around the world. But why is this important to you? What really turns you onto this subject?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of reasons. As you talked about Wisconsin, the World Bank notes 90% of people in high-income countries have access. So we're actually lucky, while only 25% of low-income countries can say the same. The OECD will tell you and make a connection to education, right? About 80% of adults that have a high school education or more can basically use the internet, right? Whereas only 40% of those that have no formal education or low levels of education can say the same. And this one's, I've done a lot of work with public education advocacy. That's some of the times that you and I have run into each other. And this one is really heartbreaking, where the United Nations reports that 2/3 of school-age children do not have internet connections in their homes, let alone skills that are needed to participate in our, so-called interconnected, incredibly global economy. When you're talking about more than 1 billion children not being able to access all that technology has to offer, we've got to do something about it. So I feel that's really, really important. I mean, I wonder from our audience, how many of you guys, it'd be great if you could write your missions, right? How many of you are working on poverty or on promoting education or health? It would be wonderful to get to know you, because I expect that if I was to ask, and let us just ask, because this is the beauty of an online forum, how many of you think that the internet is vital to your work, to you serving your communities?
Right. And we are seeing some people at least talking about their missions right now. Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Alfredo, about promoting education and children's vitality. And then promoting, comparative worldview training, promoting education. Robin, Noah, thank you. Definitely, that's resonating here for people. And this thing about high income, low income is so interesting, because we both live, without revealing where you are right now, and that is a real library. That we both live in a community not far away from each other, where I just looked at a statistic in this county, and it's an affluent county, but there are it's half the poverty rate of some of the adjacent counties in the state where we live, but that still means there are 200,000 people living what are described as islands of either poverty or islands of disconnected.
100%.
And these are often, housing units right next to other houses, yes, where the kids don't have access if they need to go to school online for some reason, like with the pandemic, or parents need to access it in order to, be able to communicate with the doctor. So this is going on far away and right next to us. And thank you, Alfredo. It's vital to be able to connect with others. Absolutely. Sharing this opportunity specifically with communities that are underrepresented, which are sometimes, again, surrounding us. So you've looked at this through the lens of education, obviously, here and abroad, because I know you've done a lot of that. That's where we first met.
Yes.
But this also is meaning for you, right? So talk about that a little bit. Why is inclusion important? Maybe taking the digital out of it for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a interesting background where my father is Indian, my mother is Pakistani, so definitely have a flavor for what it feels like to be from a developing country, and have seen so much of life. I mean, you and I met, I think, at the when we were at the American Embassy in India, and we had gone to Hong Kong, I think, for a conference together.
It was Hong Kong, yes.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And even then we were talking about development and how to help others. And here we are today doing the same thing. You know, I just feel, coming from that background, I have seen what access to education, access to health can do for people, and what happens to those that are living on sort of the sidelines of society, so to speak, or those that are oppressed, or those that are unable to just access information to be able to be a vibrant part of our economy, our society, our democracy. So it really does. It breaks my heart when I talk about children that don't have it. It breaks my heart when we talk about adults that don't have it. And I think that it is possible to make a change and to have everybody feel included. You know, TechSoup, which is where I direct their hardware program, and I love it so much in so many ways, because we're doing so many things to address digital inequities. But Connecting Up, we participated and partnered with them in a survey where we looked at, you know, 7,500 folks, just like those that are in this conversation with us today. And 95% again said that the internet is vital, just like I think Alfredo just said that, right? It is vital to what we're doing for our communities. But 43% in the same survey said that it's unaffordable to them. It's not accessible to them. So it just, to me, when I see data like that, and then combined with my life experiences, it becomes very urgent. And then, of course, there's everything that's going on with AI and quantum.
Right, which I know we're going to get into. Just to put a pin in this particular part of the conversation, though, as a practical note, because many of the people in our audience are in fundraising at not-for-profit organizations, typically across the US, sometimes abroad, that there's also a practical consideration in all this, because many of us are pushed to make sure that we're using digital platforms because they work. So if we're asking for money, we want to make sure we have everything from the old-fashioned donation button to other mechanisms of ensuring that people can give and be engaged and supported as donors and supporters in different ways, and volunteers. But it also means that there are still some people who cannot do those things. So as we all march forward towards some sort of digital progress, we can't forget the people that may not have access to those things, just as a footnote in this conversation. And maybe we'll get back to that, especially as we dive into AI and quantum computing, because for some, this is going to seem like, oh, now we're talking about, you know, some kind of science fiction. This is going to Mars. But for other people, they're already using it. And in fact, maybe many of us, if not all of us, are already using AI in some way that we may not be aware of. So before we go any further, can you define and maybe differentiate between AI and quantum computing?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI is when machines try to do human-like things. That's why it's called artificial intelligence, sort of from a cognitive science perspective. Right. Quantum computing is when the computers, the superpower of computers pretty much starts to behave like our brain. So it starts to become a very natural phenomena. When I think of, you know, AI and quantum and what they will do to inequalities, I really have to pause, because they could easily widen our gaps, right? Today, generative AI presents like the printing press. You know, everybody's excited. We all want to talk about it. You know, you would think that books are about to happen, and, you know, literally in that moment, Harry Potter is about to be written or something. But at the same time, many warn that tomorrow it might be like the atomic bomb. And Stephen Hawking, right, he was kind of very on the fence and said that AI could be the very best thing that ever happened to humanity, or it could be the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. And we don't know which one yet. So when I think of AI and quantum combined, then I think of, my gosh, computer power that's, you know, far beyond supercomputers, right? Where classical supercomputers can help to solve multifaceted issues. I get into that world of imagination is better than knowledge with Einstein, and I say, wow, like, could we really solve climate change for our progeny? Could we, could genetics of cancer really reduce the impact on women with breast cancer? Could, markets be less volatile so the poor amongst us can be better taken care of? And I start to think of, okay, wow, I could go from a binary 1 and 0 calculation to something like there's so many ways. My kids go to TJ, so quantum computing is very big at this
Thomas
school.
Jefferson High School. Yes.
Yes, it's very big at the school, and so they'll define it with say a donut, and I think Intel defines the same thing with the coin. And if you've got the 1 and the 0 defined by the sprinkle side of the donut and the plain side of the donut, and then if you were to spin it or spin a coin, then it starts to look like a sphere, and you've got so many different ways of attacking a particular problem. So I like to think of quantum as, okay, so you have a maze. All of a sudden, there are all the possibilities of solving the maze and getting to the path are in front of you. Or if you have a very, we've all done this, right? Like a puzzle about, say, the ocean. So every piece is blue, right? But it's no longer binary. So we're not just looking at one piece. Quantum's able to look at all the pieces, solve it simultaneously, and do it in one full sweep. So it's just taking the analysis that we're able to do on very complex issues and making it super tangible to us.
But the risk reward piece, you just talked about how different people have said it's either the greatest thing or the worst thing ever to happen to us. And I love the donut example because the donut is probably the greatest and the worst thing that ever happened to us, at least as a way of explaining this whole thing. But I do wonder what it means to us in the social sector, whether we're not for profits in the US, civil society organizations as they're broadly known, all the multi-sector thing, which we're going to talk about in a minute, all the people working towards addressing societal need, that as you see it today, where do AI and quantum independently or together either address or potentially exacerbate these things? Where's the risk and where's the reward? And is there any way to help ensure that it goes in one direction more than the other?
Great questions, right? Where the rewards are solutions to our increasingly complex world, increasingly interconnected world, our natural world, our educational world, our economic world. But then the threats are, jobs is top of mind on a lot of people's minds, because we know certain jobs, you can't go to a news channel and not hear these jobs will be obsolete, do these jobs. But our society, right? If information or if disinformation, this is a huge concern for me, is spread at the speed, so to speak, of quantum, that's really challenging to combat. So in a sense, it's the worst would be a threat to our democracy, to our economic system. What happens when people disrupt our economies because all of a sudden they can extrapolate things and use them to their own advantage, or if bad actors come into play. One of the things that I think governments are really concerned about, we talk a lot about cybersecurity, right? But quantum has the capacity to decrypt. So we've got to use quantum to encrypt, right? So it could go really wrong. And yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is the opportunity for me here is for all of us to come together to ensure that the inequities do not increase, right? That we are all made aware. And it's funny because, we both have kids around the same age, and I'm hopeful because I think kids of this generation are very tuned into the inequities and they are taking stands against the inequities. So I want to be hopeful because I believe in the human experiment, and I think the best possible thing that we can do to ensure that machines don't make a run for it is to keep the human piece of it at the center, to keep humans involved in the policy making, in the collaboration across everything that we know, and in checking the technology.
I want to ask you something that just occurred to me. Sometimes there are unforeseen consequences that are quite negative, and I tend to go there. What is it that happened as a result of trying to do a good thing, like something as simple as Netflix suggesting a film that I might like. One use of AI, that seems like a positive thing, but in a way. But then there are all these Cyberdyne systems, the Terminator takes over the world scenarios that we worry about. But there may be some other things that we're not thinking about as unforeseen consequences that go and follow this discussion about equity and inequity. One is that with the development of mobile phone systems, it did mean that people who had no access to communication in places in the past, in South America, in parts of Africa, that they didn't have to suddenly build telephone poles and wires because they were able to communicate through mobile. So I'm wondering if there might be some positive, unforeseen consequences of the development of AI and quantum.
Yes, and it's very interesting when I sort of think about the most important thing that quantum computing could help humanity with, right? It's hard for me to put it together because I think as we develop quantum, we will understand so many things, including dark matter. So when we think about the possibilities, they are difficult to imagine. I think what we have to stay grounded, though. We have to work with what we know. So for example, let's ask our audience this question, like how much money, you mentioned mobile phones, but let's just talk for a minute about infrastructure, right? Just broadband. So how much money would it take for us to sort of offer broadband access worldwide? That would be a good question to sort of
the total cost. Right. What is the cost of wiring?
Like,
not wiring,
what do people think? Yes. What do
for everybody to have access? Wow. That's yeah. Okay. So these are going to be the brave people who in the chat make some incredible guess. Who is the bravest in this room? Paulina wins on the speed anyway. 1 trillion, laugh out loud. Okay. So any other takers? I have no idea. So there are no wrong answers on this one.
There are no wrong answers.
Okay. So far, Paulina is the only one willing to stick her neck out on this one. Oh, there we go. Another. Oh, so Jack, our producer, thank you. 1,000,000,001.
Oh, good for him.
Okay, there we go. So, okay, do you have a hint about this? I mean, where do you think it is?
Well, the World Bank estimates that universal access to broadband, just broadband, not to digital inclusion, right? So this is interesting because this is not, we're not talking about devices, we're not talking about, I don't think, digital literacy, right? We're not talking about meaningful content or participation in economies, societies, and democracies, is going to require more than 400 billion by 2030. So to Paulina's response, right? Yeah. Is it 1 trillion if we include all that is necessary? We don't know, but we do know that the bank has done research to say that broadband alone will require a sizable commitment by a lot of people. And so when you think of gaps widening and really discussing the possibilities, it's important, I think, to come back and say, okay, we have information on what it'll take to put us on the right path and on the right side of history. of digital inclusion. So no matter how these advances turn out, right, how they play out, the inequities will prevent masses of people from participating in the economy, society, and democracy unless we come together and unless we really take on, we start to raise this money. We start to talk to people about, it doesn't matter what mission you're doing. Every mission has a stake in building technology capacity and talking to people about the need for inclusion. Because, one of the things that, because I'd worked for the UN, one of the things that makes me really focused on the digital divide is that the digital divide is becoming a driving force for the divide and development itself, right? If let's take UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example. This also grounds us because these are things that we're working towards, right? We're working Goal 4 to fix education, Goal 5, gender equality, Goal 8, economic growth, right? We're 10 inequalities. But what's really important here is all of those goals depend on Goal 9, which is infrastructure for digital inclusion. Because if we don't get to the inclusion, all of these different things that we want to see to make the world a better place can't be done with as much efficiency or speed.
I'm sure we could talk a lot about who would stand in the way of that kind of growth or development. But maybe we can also figure out what role we each play. And I know we're going to talk about multi-sector now. I just want to make sure I have an eye also in the chat, because we had a note from Abraham just saying, I think it's important to consider whether that infrastructure would represent a public utility available to entire communities, or as privately owned, profit-motivated infrastructure, sort of like, I don't know, I guess this is a bit of both with my iPhone, that would be available to those who can pay, which is always one of the issues. And I wanted to ask about that. I mean, if we just for a second put aside the governmental and non-governmental actors who have a stake in actually preventing the implementation of infrastructure, the wide dissemination of access to information or digital, because there are people like that, or who try to limit it, like communication channels within those devices, for example. If we just put that aside, don't we all have a role? So what is the first of all, can you define multi-sector? And then what are each of our roles in that, especially in the nonprofit sector? Because we often feel like we're small and weak and we just have to raise money all the time. We really can't do anything. Is any of that true? So first, define for us, and then what's our role?
Yes. First of all, none of that about our sector is true, right? We so need a seat at the table to make sure this goes right for humanity. I'll start with saying multi-sector to me means the nonprofit sector, right? The keepers of civil society, government, and the private sector. Mm-hmm. Let's sort of keep those three. I mean, academia also I would count, mm-hmm. but let's stay focused on those three. So if we talk about those three, I really believe the state of affairs is at a place, the current state of affairs, where the nonprofit sector, nor the public or the private, can close the digital divide in silos or in isolation. I feel the nonprofit sector our role is to provide insights into the needs of marginalized communities. We understand communities. We understand and we listen to communities, really. We start with communities. And the front line here to me is so important when building bridges, because we're responsible for amplifying civil society voices and actions, just as Paul said, to ensure that whatever we design and we build is actually going to benefit communities. So that, to me, we do this very well. We have these insights and we capture them. We care about them. Governments, I think, need to do policy reforms. Of course, they need to make investments, right, into the infrastructure. And then the private sector has to really innovate to close the divide, right? They must think of increasing efficiencies and reducing costs. They must conduct analyses to address risks and figure out which are the best opportunities to make this happen, because they are good at that. They're good at innovation. They're good at efficiency. They're good at scaling technology to places where we might find it more difficult. So I feel that there, and in that way, there is good news. I think there is, this is so nice. I tend to be, sort of an optimist with a realistic approach, right? And I feel that if you think of what's happening, there is broad support. The UN has put forth SDG 9, right, to say, let's do this. Member countries and private companies are committing to universal access and affordable access. And civil society is definitely rising to meet the needs. Many are already working together to create alliances to address these inequities. And I'd love to, share a bit more about that with TechSoup for you, for everyone.
Well, yes, and that's exactly where I was going to go, because again, people may have heard of TechSoup. They may have gotten a piece of software thanks to TechSoup, but I don't think that many people necessarily know what TechSoup is about. And in fact, for those who are here in the room with us live, it'd be great to know if you've interacted with TechSoup and in what way. It's just a nice thing to do and to share. But yes, could you talk a bit about what is TechSoup really, and how is it addressing these needs? Well, how is it working with our sector here in the US, where most of our listeners and viewers are, but also how is it interacting to address these issues of inequities through tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do TechSoup is a really special place. Our je ne sais quoi is this idea of multi-sector collaboration. We've been able to create this ecosystem that includes government officials, private sector executives, and nonprofit professionals who are committed to driving digital inclusion. They're committed to creating opportunities to help those who are at risk of being left behind. I love, can I say about TechSoup? I love to come to work every day. I feel that, we make a difference every day because technology makes every single mission more impactful. So I'm grateful for the deep community knowledge that informs our efforts, and quite humbled to lead digital inclusion with an organization that's been doing it for 30 years. So they've been around, they've been building capacity. I think the number that we've served is 1.44 million nonprofit organizations in 236 countries or territories. And it's in collaboration with 930, I think, corporations, foundations, governments, or other funding partners. So they have really kind of perfected this idea, or at least really created this perfect is a tough word, but really created a means to make a big difference. This multi-sector collaboration has allowed us to deliver US $19.1 billion in market value of technology. So they are doing something right to fix the divide.
So what does that mean, though? I mean, those are big numbers, lots of countries, a lot of impact, tremendous number of organizations. What does that look like to, I know there's no typical organization, but some examples of how you've interacted with different not-for-profits and CSOs around the world, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. I could in terms of CSOs, there's so many ways that we engaged our CSOs. One of the easiest way that we drive inclusion is through the marketplace, to the TechSoup marketplace. That's very tangible, right? It's a one-stop shop where you can find affordable, philanthropic-focused corporations tend to contribute to products and services. And in hardware alone, we've done incredible work to bring devices so that nonprofits can be more successful. The other ways is that we offer courses. So we're very focused on digital skill building. And so, folks today might want to explore so many different courses, whether it's fundraising, whether it's AI, grant management, a suite of valuable content that's catered to civil society. We do something called a digital assessment through a tool, and you can just come and you can use this tool to determine where your organization is. And then we do something that's through our digital resilience program, where we actually work with you hand in hand in cohorts, and we build your resilience. So there are so many ways that TechSoup is really changing the landscape of how civil society can use technology.
If people want to learn more about that, and particularly that instrument where they can do that self-assessment, how would they do that? We can put that in the chat, unless you want to do that, of course.
Yeah, it's called the Digital Assessment Tool, and we could grab it from TechSoup. You can go to ts.org, or you can go to tsgn.org, and you're all set.
Great. And Jack, if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. So tsn.org, or excuse me, tsgn.org, and you just did it as ts.org. And maybe we can put that in as a hyperlink, Jack, and then people can grab that. That sounds like something that would be immensely valuable, because organizations come to this work with such a wide variety of knowledge, experience, and resources and staffing, that knowing kind of where they are in relation to themselves and what's possible is essential. Not just how do I compare myself to Oxford or Harvard or the United Way, but it's where am I today? That's right. Really valuable.
That's right.
So TechSoup is dealing with a lot of stuff. I don't know how you do all. How big is the team at TechSoup now?
We're over 200 people, but our real strength in my experience is the TechSoup Global Network, right? Mm-hmm. We've established regional centers in Africa, the Americas, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And we've brought together over 60 partner organizations in 6 continents and in 39 languages, because I think TechSoup has this commitment to community and understanding that the local realities and the needs of the community and the local context is so important if we're going to address the needs that we aim to. So the global network, it reaches frontline community workers with digital solutions and resources. It sort of brings all the hundreds of contributors, tech companies, foundations, their commitment to those who need it most. And collectively, our network offers, another thing that's really lovely about TechSoup is that people trust TechSoup because we've been around for a long time. And so it's this trusted supply chain of vital infrastructure and vital technology that we can, bring to those that service community safety nets, those organizations that are really, really, some of our organizations are just tiny. Most of our organizations are less than 100 million in operating budget. So I feel like it's a very 100,000, excuse me, and it's a very, very just a very special place.
I imagine that part of the trust must also stem from having people who are closer to the challenges that these organizations are trying to address. That if you referenced the World Bank, and the World Bank, of course, has people from all over the world. But one of the criticisms of the World Bank is it tends to operate like many large international agencies out of these central locations, major centers of power. People are well paid. Nothing against that. That's fine. But it means that sometimes they might feel or appear disconnected from these issues. But as a network of people who are right in the thick of trying to address societal need, I can imagine that must make TechSoup kind of a trusted partner from that perspective as well.
Yes, and very rewarding. I think that, I remember speaking to, when I started to look for a place where I could make a difference to the small people, the small organizations, it was really wonderful, because in my interview, I realized, my goodness, if we wouldn't help these organizations, nobody would, right? Because they are so small and they might fall off the radar of the larger nonprofits. So I feel we're trusted because we care,
Right.
we're trusted because we're, I think we just really want to be the folks that fight for, advocate for small nonprofits.
How are you getting the resources at TechSoup to do all this work? Because you yourselves have to presumably raise money or work with these partners or in order to get the resources to redistribute. Maybe that's a model itself for some of the other things that your whole network is trying to address. How are you doing it?
I think that we're very authentic in what we do. And I think the story resonates with a lot of people because it's close to home. Each of us has a person inside that wants to make a difference to a small nonprofit, to people in the front lines, to communities. And I think we've created a way to scale that because of our global network. And I think that's very compelling because we, one of the recent things that we've launched, for example, is our data commons project in collaboration with Google and the United Nations. And so we've got, we care to figure out what the data is saying about food security or domestic violence. And then we care to bring that and share it with folks that would be willing to fund change. And there are organizations that I work with closely, and this is sort of where the private sector is engaged, right? Just as the government is engaged. If the government's putting out, 40 billion towards infrastructure, the US government, and the Europeans are putting out, 7.5 billion euros to fix this, right? The private sector is also doing stuff. I mean, I can give you examples of folks that I work with on a day-to-day basis. And, Cisco is one of them. They've provided donated product through their product grant program in collaboration with TechSoup for the last 20 years. They help us with networking. They help us with security for the sector. And it's been just a delight to have that support and that understanding from a company that essentially powers an inclusive future for all, for sure, because 80% of the world's internet depends on Cisco, or is built upon Cisco technology. If you think about Dell, they're committed too. They're partnering with us for digital inclusion. They're partnering with schools, governments, nonprofits, private organizations. They're focused on skill building, on information technologies, connectivity, on creating networks. They, in fact, have committed to giving every school internet by 2030 by partnering with UNICEF. HP is, I work with them. They're accelerating equitable access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity. So I think there is, it goes back to that very human thing of very human need to do better, to help those that need the help, to understand that it's, we're all better if all boats are lifted, and I think that that's really, it's a compelling story.
So that's what you do. Where are you going, and how can organizations then, beyond the things that you mentioned, work with you to help you get there? Because as you said, a rising tide lifts all boats. So that means that all of us have a role in this to play. So where is TechSoup going, and how are you going to get there?
Well, I mean, I like to think of, three things to me that really seem to be something that I do every day. And TechSoup's doing very well, is digital inclusion, right? I mean, through the marketplace, through our TechSoup learning and courses. We're also, through the data commons and other projects and just our experience with civil society, building a lot of insights into what civil society needs and then sharing that insight. And another area where we're focused is, this is you can think of it as our innovations, but they're apps for good. So for example, if a really good idea comes out of particularly comes out of a community need, then we work really hard to multi-sector address it, in a multi-sector manner. So for example, HiveMind is a community for our digital activists. So we're saying, gosh, democracy is at risk. Let's come together. Let's talk to each other. Let's figure out how to promote these values. Or the Safe Shelter Collaborative for survivors of domestic violence. We will say, hey, let's provide a safe place for folks that are trying to become survivors of violence. We do this is one of my favorites. We do because I used to be a programmer at Accenture, so it's nice to see and help young folks, especially low-income folks. So we do something called Meet and Code. It's primarily in Europe. It's grown. It was supported by SAP for a while, and now it'll be supported in 2023 by Amazon. And it's and going forward, hopefully. And then, this is 27 TechSoup Europe partners coming together to teach code. And in 5 years, we've trained more than 200,000 students. So it's sort of this scale that I'm talking about. We held, 600 events in 15 countries the first year, and now we're at 35,000 young people in, we've got 1,500, something like that, events in 35 countries. So I feel like we know how to scale, and I think that's our secret sauce.
There's going back full circle to how we began and talking about AI specifically. How does this AI and quantum fit into TechSoup's work today and your future planning?
Yeah, so I feel that, with AI, there's so much to think about for civil society. Mm-hmm. One thing is that data for civil society is often incomplete, right? Especially outside of the United States. So one of our focuses, I think, is to really be the voice of that, because AI is just going to start to build models based on data. And if the data itself is weak, then we need to make sure that we strengthen that data and or we prevent models from, going at it without really looking at the data. So that's very important. We also feel at a very basic level that civil society is educated. So, we're working with grant providers to create courses in artificial intelligence. And, your wheelhouse, I think it's really useful to think about, very concrete things in terms of using AI for fundraising, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can be so much more effective. So there are lots of different things that we're thinking about. I say this often to colleagues that we need to have a seat at the table when we're talking about AI or when we're talking about quantum, because the changes that are coming require us to elevate the voices of civil society and actions that'll protect civil society. So we're working to create that seat at the table, which is one of the main reasons that I did this event with you, to impress upon the vastness of and the experience in multi-sector collaboration that we've had and that we'd like to propel in every conversation.
Thank you so much for all of this. Really do appreciate it. And you've already shared how people can at least have one window on TechSoup right there. But if they want to just follow all the things you're doing, because there's a lot of it, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, there's lots of different channels. First, you guys are all welcome to link in with me. And if you have specific questions, I'm happy to continue the conversation. But yeah, follow us on, we've got, all the social media happening. There's Twitter, there's Facebook. You will easily reach us. If you're not members, become members, because it's a really, really, there are some great things happening, and we'd love to have you.
Which people can do by just going to the TechSoup site, right? So,
Yep.
yes. Okay. And Jack, you thank you for already putting in your LinkedIn address. So thank you very much for doing that. Really do appreciate your sharing some of this today. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the sector, both at TechSoup and beyond. As you all will see, she wears plenty of hats, and she's done that throughout her career. And she will continue to do that, much to the benefit of all of us. So our gratitude to you. And thank you to everybody who hung out with us live, as well as those who are watching the recording later. I hope you'll take advantage of some of these windows on both the work of TechSoup and the rest of the work that she is doing, and make sure that your organizations are aware of it as well, so you can support this effort towards using our latest technologies both responsibly and ethically for the benefit of equity, which is the big challenge for all of us these days. So thank you all very much. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. And that will be, I think, in a week's time. So if you want to learn more about what's coming up, and I hope you do, you'll find that over at DonorSearch.net. Just look under the resources tab, and you can see recordings there and listen to the podcast. You can also just see at the top of the website a way to sign up so you won't miss announcements about future sessions. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing you at one of those future sessions. Till then, take care.